Afternoon. Welcome to Lesson Leadership Series. I'm Dr. Henry Stanford, Associate Director of Applied Leadership here at Muskingum University. Lesson Leadership Series focuses on various aspects of applied leadership around real-world issues. Today's focus is on keys to negotiation success. So please turn off your cameras and mute your microphones. Type your initial question to the chat box. Once we start the Q&A session, you are welcome to open up your cameras and unmute your microphones to join our conversation. Today, our first presenter is Dr. Robert McManus. Dr. McManus is Executive Director of Graduate Business, Applied Leadership, and Professor of Leadership here at Muskingum University. He's an active member of the International Leadership Association. Our second presenter is Mr. Larry Ray. Mr. Larry Ray is a senior adjunct professor at George Washington University School of Law and Capital University School of Law. He is a practicing attorney and serves as a trainer for American Management Association. Larry is a graduate of Muskingum University and a graduate of Capital University School of Law. So once again, turn it over to Dr. McManus.
Let me add one thing about this in terms of my bio, that the leadership aspect where I began to learn leadership was at Muskingum University. May sound funny, but I was the resident advisor, so a lot of leadership there. And then I became the dorm director. I had no idea what direction my career was going to head. And then I was a political science major. Then along comes Dr. Bob Munkers, who for some reason decided that all three of us dorm directors were going to go to law school. And he was very persuasive. He showed great leadership because he not only said, I want you to go to law school, we did go to law school, all three different law schools. And he not only suggested it, but at the time I wanted to go to Capital University Law School. And luck would have it, a Muskingum alum was the dean of Capital University Law School. So Dr. Munkers made a couple calls just commending me. So way back then, leadership was being developed right there at Muskingum University.
Well, thank you, Larry. It is great to have you here today. And we love having alumni on our lessons in leadership to hear what people's experience was and what it currently is. I guess my first question for you as we get into this presentation today is a broad question is, how do you think negotiation skills contribute to effective leadership?
There's a good question, and the next slide will provide part of the answer, is that that research indicates that leaders are negotiating 50% of their waking time, but they don't really call it negotiation or maybe even recognize it as negotiation. Instead, they may call it communication or leadership or having meetings, whatever, because you would think if leaders are negotiating 50% of their waking lives, that they would be better at it than what they are. But I think a lot of leaders, when they think about negotiation, they think negotiation is face-to-face and there's a contract or agreement. And what's very interesting is that there's great research out at Cornell University by Dr. David Dunning. And all of his research indicates that at least 30% of the leaders think they are great negotiators. They're grand negotiators, and yet they are not. That's 30%. And if the leaders would have some humility and ask for feedback, they might find out that they need a little help in leadership skills. Beyond that, this Cornell study indicated that about 18% of leaders are incompetent in their negotiation skills. So that really opens the door that there needs to be a lot of work in this whole area of negotiation. Because as the slide says, negotiation is an art with a set of skills, strategies, and tactics, all which can be learned.
Well, I guess that would be my next question then, is what are those tactics? What are those strategies? And how can we go about learning some of them?
Well, one of the keys is basically on the next slide is negotiation. So we outlined 5 keys. 1 is goal, 2 is planning, 3 is stages, 4 creativity, and the last is evaluation. So the quote is, the successful negotiation is not about getting to yes, is about mastering no and understanding what the path to an agreement is. Yeah, negotiation is a very structured process. And we have kind of a step-by-step communication process that is most likely to lead to a resolution. It really doesn't matter how many stages there are. It could be 5 or 3 or 4. What matters is that you are communicating in a process that is most likely to lead to a resolution.
So talk to me a little bit more about the importance of those stages and how you follow those stages. Um, how might skipping a stage or skipping around affect the outcome negatively?
Yes, because the stages, and again, the number of stages, it does not matter. But the communication process where you're communicating, you're setting the stage for what the situation is, what the issues are, what the priorities are. Then you come up with options, which leads us to creativity. After you have those options, then you lead towards the agreement and then plan of action plus the evaluation. We have ceased, a lot of us, shall we say, in the negotiation field, have stopped talking about win, lose, or getting to win, or getting to yes, getting to no, whatever. I think the new way to approach it is that negotiation is goal oriented. What is my goal? What is your goal? And together as partners, not as opponents, as partners, maybe sitting around a round table, oval table, to symbolize no sides to the situation. We will work together on achieving all of our goals. Because a lot of people, when they think about negotiation, they think about the pie. How are we going to split the pie? Our advice is forget about the pie altogether. That because that gets you kind of down a road we don't want to go. That we want to know what the goals are, and then how we can not only achieve those goals, but actually surpass the goals.
So how do you use creativity and come up with these options and alternatives? And I would say even get people away from thinking of this pie, right? But where how can we create a bigger pie if we were to use that metaphor? How do we get there?
Exactly. If we could advance to slide 8, which is about creativity, and then we can come back to these afterwards.
This
Okay,
one,
there.
okay.
So yes, creativity is so vital that Dr. Jerry Williams from Brigham Young University, that he did an extensive study in terms of what are the characteristics of an effective negotiator. And they came up with basically about 5. One vital one is creativity. And it is so interesting how we as children have lots of creativity, but then we kind of lose that creativity. If you could advance to the next slide for a moment. Yeah, so this is,
More?
yes, so this is with the study, and you notice of all what the 6 vital characteristics of an effective negotiator, creativity is a big one. And if you could advance one more slide. This is very interesting study by NASA, the loss of creativity. It says, in a longitudinal test of creative potential, a NASA study found that out of 1,600 4 and 5-year-olds, 98% scored at creative genius level. 5 years later, only 30% of the same group. And again, when the same test was administered to adults, it was found that only 2% scored at this genius level. I had a great experiment that I don't know if you can see this pole necessarily, but I was driving on I-70 through Ohio and stopped at a truck stop and found this purple pole. And I thought, oh, this would be great for my module on creativity. And it just happened to be that the next week I was training a group of retired judges to be mediators, and we had our creativity module. So I held this pole up to them and I said, if you had this pole, what would you do with it? They were completely stumped. They kept saying, "What is the answer?" Then I took it to my law school student, George Washington University Law School, and they came up with 5 or 6. Then I took it where I was teaching at Bancroft Elementary School. The children had to be stopped at 32. And it exactly acted out what we're seeing this NASA study. And what the NASA study concluded is how we lose our creativity, our institutions, and primarily the schools. But as negotiators, we have got to turn that around. We had another experiment, which I do a lot in my classes, where I draw, like on a whiteboard, a number of squares. And then I ask a number of students, each one, to divide that square into 4 different parts, but I won't be measuring. It has never failed that the first 4 squares are always the same. You know, you divide it by the plus or the X or the longitudinal, the latitudinal. After those 4 squares, the participants are stumped. They are completely stumped as to what to do. Then some participant, some student begins to think, oh, wait. They begin to think, I hate to say outside the box because we're inside the box. But nevertheless, they think, oh, wait, what about squiggly lines? What about circles? And suddenly the floodgates open and they realize that we could spend the rest of the day dividing these squares into 4 equal parts if we're not measuring. So somehow that's what negotiators need to do. Because during negotiation planning, that we need to come up with lots and lots of options, lots of different ideas for resolving every particular issue. And it doesn't mean we reveal all those options. It just means that we are loaded with options as we go into the negotiation. And by being loaded with options, that gives us power.
Mm.
Also during creativity, that we need to think about alternatives. And that is, what if this negotiation doesn't work? That's what you got to think about during the planning stage. So then you start developing your alternatives. Sometimes we call it a BATNA, the best alternative to negotiated agreement.
May I go back a slide
Oh,
here
yes.
because I saw that there.
Yeah.
So I hear you saying, okay, so first of all, we have to think about many options and not just maybe a yes or no option, but how can we creatively think about that? And I see this BATNA and the WATNA. Can you tell us a little bit about that in reference to the creativity with the both options and alternatives?
Exactly. So when we talk about options, we're talking about options within the negotiation. So you want to be loaded with those, because once you are loaded with those, that sometimes it becomes contagious. So if you throw out options, then your negotiating partners, remember, I'm not saying opponent, your negotiating partners also throw out options, and then you're rolling. Um, and that's how that during the negotiation, you may come out with an agreement that goes far beyond the goals and surpasses the goals. Also, during negotiation, you must think about alternatives, and that is alternatives. What if this negotiation is not successful? And that's where you try to develop as many BATNAs as you can. Best alternative to negotiated agreement. So if you go into that negotiation and you know that you have 4 BATNAs, that you have 4 viable alternatives, maybe 4 different companies. Oh, it makes you so much more powerful. It takes the stress off. Nevertheless, you also need to think about your WATNAs, the worst alternative to negotiated agreement. Sometimes maybe the worst is you go to court or you go to arbitration. But nevertheless, during the planning, you need to be loaded with your BATNAs and think about your WATNAs.
I love those acronyms. I'm going to be thinking about those. I want to backtrack a little bit because I think my question pushed us ahead a little bit. And you talked about these negotiation stages, the goals, planning, strategy, creativity, and evaluate, right?
Yes.
If we should we go to goals? We've talked a little bit about creativity. Should we pop back to goals?
Yes.
Okay. Next slide.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so a lot of people do not spend a lot of time thinking about goals. They just think they're going into the negotiation. And I've heard a lot of negotiators come out, they say, "Oh, I felt really bad about that negotiation," or "I felt really good about that negotiation." I'm very concerned about your feelings. Nonetheless, my big concern is, what was your goal? Was what was the agreement? Did your agreement meet your goal? If it did, that's a successful negotiation. So you really need to have a very clear goal. Um, and during the planning process, you also need to spend a little bit of time thinking about what your partners, some people would call them the opponent or the other side. We're using the term what your negotiation partners' goals are too. It reminds me of the quote by Abraham Lincoln where he said, "When I go to meet with a person, I spend 1/3 of my time thinking about what I'm going to do or say, and 2/3 of my time thinking about what they are going to do or say." That is wise for negotiators. So you have all your plan of action and you have your goals, etc. You're envisioning your ideal agreement for yourself. Then 2/3 of the time, put yourself in the shoes of the other person, trying to figure out what is their goal and how can we craft this negotiation so we walk away and all the goals are not only achieved, but maybe even surpassed.
So I hear you saying that we need to have our goal in mind, but also creative solutions
Mhm.
to reach or possibly surpass that goal going in. And
Yes.
then hearing what your partners may want and how you can work with that. I see here that you've mentioned a round table. You've mentioned that before, for no sides. And imagine each leader has a negotiation toolbox. Can you just talk a little bit about that, if you will? Is that the BATNA and the WATNAs?
A little bit. So the round table that I spend a lot of time thinking about the environs in terms of where we're going to negotiate and what the room looks like, etc. That research has indicated that the day here in the United States that people are the most productive is Tuesday. So if I have my druthers, it'll be Tuesday. The research also shows that here in the United States, the time where we are the most productive is 10:30. So if I have my druthers, I'm going to schedule the negotiation for Tuesday at 10:30. Then I take a look around the room and I want it to be as positive as possible. So I want there to be lots of windows. I even look at the artwork, and if the artwork is a little dismal, I cover it up. If I have the
Huh.
choice, I want to have lots of refreshments, soft, nice chairs, etc. So that, um, and there's a little bit of research from the Harvard Law School, a program on negotiation, that they said the research shows that just by being positive, you increase the likelihood of settlement by 2 to 4%. That's not much. But don't you want that? If all you have to do is be positive and you increase the likelihood by 2 to 4%. So we use that in our language too. So that's why I try to find a round table, kind of
Mm.
symbolizing no sides to the situation. I call you my negotiating partner, not my opponent. So in terms of the toolbox, that Maslow says, if your only tool is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So what the effective negotiator wants is envision a toolbox. And in that toolbox, you have your hammer. In that toolbox, you have lots and lots of tools. So as you flow along that, and it seems like a difficult situation, maybe you're asking a lot of questions and you're not receiving any answers. Then, so don't keep asking those questions. Instead, dip into your toolbox, get another tool. I find where people find themselves in impasses or stalemates is when they have one tool that they keep using and using and using, is not working, and yet they insist on that particular tool. And it's not that old saying, if you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. So if you find yourself using a negotiation tool that maybe has always worked for you before, but is not working now, have the cognitive ability to say, okay, this is not working with this particular individual, so I need to find another tool that might work better.
Okay, so we start with our goal.
Mhm.
We think about how we want to achieve that goal and many opportunities to achieve that goal in different ways. We're thinking about our toolbox. We've got this planning stage here. Can you
Yes.
talk to us a little bit more about that? So if I'm going into, for example, a conversation with a faculty member about, I don't know, a promotion or something of that nature, how can I plan? Because I would imagine that in your view of negotiation, even a conversation like that would be a
Mhm.
negotiation, right? So how can I plan to be successful for that goal and keeping that creativity in mind?
When planning, we have decided that planning is so vital that we have listed it as stage one. Most people, when they think about stage one negotiation, they think the introduction. We don't. We say introduction is stage two. Planning is stage one. And some people say that if you're going to have a half-hour meeting, you probably should plan for about an hour. So many of my compadres, they're so on the go that they say they don't have time to plan. And
Hmm.
then that old saying, um, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. You must have time for planning. And then back to the Abraham Lincoln, if you have if you have 60 minutes to plan, then spend 20 minutes thinking about what is my goal? What is my ideal agreement? What are my options? What are my alternatives? Then the next 60 minutes, put yourself in their shoes. What's their goal? What's their ideal agreement? And what do you think their options and alternatives might be? This gives you great power and confidence. And it also, listening is a great skill of a leader and a negotiator. And I find that once you go through the planning stage, that your ability to listen is much higher. Because a lot of times what impedes the ability to listen during negotiation is you're wondering, what am I going to say? What's he
Hmm.
going to say? What am I going to do? Well, during planning, you have that all worked out. And I was thinking about this example of where I was coaching a friend of mine, and and he wanted a raise. And I said, okay, let's play this out. Let's do the planning and play this out. How are you going to approach your boss for a raise? And he said, okay, here's what I'm going to do. So we both work for the same corporation, and I'm going to say, that a boss, that I'm retiring in 2 years, and you're retiring soon, and you realize that our retirement pay, is based on our last year's salary. So that's why I need a raise. And I was saying, oh boy, no, you got to put yourself in your boss's shoes and think, what's in it for her? What's in it for him? And instead, the approach we used, successful, was he said, okay, boss, that you've been taking care of your health a lot, so that's good. And so I've been substituting for you, and I want to represent you in the best way possible. Everyone else in the room, we'll just say, is 17 grade, and I'm a 16 grade. And you know how valued grades are, that they might pay less attention to me. I can represent you better if I go up to grade 17. And that was the winning argument of the day. And the key was he put himself in the boss's shoes. What's in it for me?
That's very helpful. Okay, so goal, plan, consider those options and what the other person may
Mhm.
be thinking about. Um, what about this next stage here, the negotiation stages, this process that's a step by step to lead to a resolution? Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yes. So in the very beginning, there's the introduction where we have the planning stage. In the very beginning is the introductory stage. And a lot of people think that that's kind of a wasted time, kind of the small talk, et cetera, et cetera. But during the introductory stage, that we want to get to know each other, and you've done your planning, so you may even know how this person goes about negotiating. that during that stage, you want to set ground rules and guidelines. And not only set those ground rules and guidelines, that you need to get agreement to those. I have a lot of professors at the American Management Association, and when they start their class, they come in with a page of ground rules and guidelines for how we're going to conduct this class. That is not a good way to do it. How I do it, both in negotiation and my classes, is I've said, okay, let's set some ground rules and guidelines. Here's one or two. And then I involve everyone to set the ground rules and guidelines. And initially, people are pretty happy, they're friendly, and they'll have guidelines like only one person speaks at a time, or be respectful, or don't use threats, don't name call, that sort of thing. And then after you get those ground rules, we'll say on the board, then you get a set. So you want everyone to raise their hand and say, yes, these are the ground rules. This is how this negotiation is going to be conducted. Then you go to the next stage and you you ask the person, what's your situation? And then I listen so carefully that after they describe their situation, I then, okay, let me summarize. And then I'll test, did I listen accurately? Then in the ideal, they do the same thing to me. So Larry, what's your situation? They listen so well, they summarize. Then the next step is a step that a lot of people forget, and that is defining issues. What are the issues we have to decide here today? And I always put them on the paper chart, on the whiteboard. We'll just say long-term contract, short-term contract, and a dispute resolution clause. And that I also get the agreement. So those are the issues we're discussing today. What that does, the value of that, is a lot of people play games in negotiation. And at the very last, they say, oh, and they throw in a new issue. By setting the issues, by getting agreement, these are the issues, you eliminate that game. And if that game happens to continue, you have a way to take care of it. Then, after you have the issues up there, we'll say 3, that's when the options come up. Okay, let's take issue number 1, the long-term contract. What are the options? We gather all the options and then we decide which is the most viable one. Then we go to issue number 2, what's the most viable? Issue number 3, what are the options? Decide. You don't shake hands after you get through with each. Instead, after you get these 3 viable options, then you step back, look at the big picture. Okay, then you reach the agreement. And that is kind of the communication process that is most likely to lead to a resolution.
I noticed this quote on the slide. It says 90% of the time persuasion is not effective, and why? Persuaders are persuading themselves. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Oh, yes, yes. I was teaching, I created this negotiation course for the American Management Association, and we had a module on persuasion and influence. Many of the students found that so fascinating that then we created a whole separate course of persuasion and influence. And so, yes, that I find that at least 90% of the time, that when the people think they're being persuasive, they're not. And the main reason, there are a variety of reasons, but the main reason is that they are persuading themselves. And instead, as we've said before, you need to put yourself in the shoes of the other person and figure out what would persuade them. And we know that the key to persuasion is that you appeal to emotions, you appeal to values, and you appeal to logic. Those are the keys. And then you vary that according to which one the person's most concerned about. Maybe you are a very logical person. So I'm going to weigh heavily on persuading you based on logic. Maybe for this particular issue that you're very emotional about it. In that case, then I'll weigh more toward emotions. So I basically frame my persuasion according to the person I'm trying to persuade, not me.
That's difficult, especially if you're very, I want to say, maybe have a predisposition towards logic, or you might be emotional, but the different arguments are going to persuade someone else differently. You kind of have to take yourself out of it and say what's going to be best for that listener in order to persuade them. It's a thoughtful response. Okay, so we've talked about goals.
Before
And
we leave this, that yeah,
I'm sorry?
you are completely right. That is very challenging. And I do a lot of workplace mediations, and mediation is basically assisted negotiation. And so it's usually a supervisor or supervisee. And when I have them in private sessions, I will ask the supervisor, okay, put yourself in the shoes of the supervisee. Or I'll ask the supervisee, put yourself in the shoes of the supervisor. They are in those shoes for 45 seconds, and then they're right back into theirs.
Mhm.
So you are absolutely right. It is quite an art to really put yourself in the shoes of somebody else.
Okay, so we've talked about goals, planning, following these stages. Is it okay if I pop to the next slide? So we've talked about creativity as well, and the BATNA and the WANTNA, very helpful. If you will, talk a little bit about this idea of characteristics of an effective negotiator. I see that you have on your slide being ethical, trustworthy, creative, flexible, rational, adherence to customs. I guess I'm interested in how we can remain ethical and trustworthy while also being flexible and creative, right? I think that's a difficult balance.
Mhm.
How do we go about achieving that balance?
Well, this is a great study by my colleague Jerry Williams, and he's in Utah, and he did this study where he interviewed thousands and thousands, and then said, who are the most effective negotiators? And once they identify them, what makes them effective? So if you want to have the reputation as an effective negotiator, we know what you do, that you develop these sort of characteristics. And when we went on, we talked about creativity already. When we went on to ethical and trustworthy, it's like, what do you mean by ethical and trustworthy? Invariably, they meant honesty. And so in many of my classes, I draw kind of a continuum. One is open, not open, and the other is honest, not honest. And almost all the students put their little hash marks in different spots. So I encourage all my participants to somehow, it's going to be very difficult. Somehow you need to uncouple open and honest and open. Those
Hmm.
are negotiation. They are two different things. So you need to uncouple them, kind of uncouple like the salt and pepper. So being honest that you want to be as an effective negotiator, you want to be perfectly honest. So when someone says, "Oh, that person is an effective negotiator," and you say, "What makes that person an effective negotiator?" That person is honest. What they say, I know I can trust. So that honesty is part of your character, is part of your effective negotiation character. We distinguish that from being open or closed about information. That is very strategic. So somehow we need to uncouple open and honest and realize that honesty is part of my character. Open is part of a strategy. I would love for a negotiation to be perfectly open. So in a negotiation, I would say, I want a short-term contract with you. And then I wait because I've given them some information. I want something back. What an ineffective negotiator does, that they keep giving more and more and more and more information. Not me. For every bit of information I give, I want something back. So it's kind of a tit for tat, quid pro quo. And that's how you make a very, very effective negotiation. So uncoupling the honest and open, closed about information is a key. And it's interesting that the last one, adherence to local customs, that when you first read that, you think, well, that makes sense. If I'm negotiating in Saudi Arabia, If I'm negotiating Thailand, it means so much more than that. If you're negotiating with a big firm versus a
Mm.
small firm, if you're negotiating in Springfield, Ohio versus Columbus, Ohio, if you're negotiating in the social work arena rather than the legal arena, you need to do a lot of planning and figure out
Mm.
how did they go about negotiating. It could be very different. Flexible. That is a great characteristic. And if you notice that I keep using this term effective negotiator, I'm not using the terms collaborative negotiator, cooperative negotiator, aggressive negotiator. Instead, you need to be an effective negotiator. That is, I may watch you in one negotiation. I'll say, wow, you are so aggressive. Then I'll watch you in another negotiation. You are so collaborative. Another negotiation. You are so cooperative. So an effective negotiator is very flexible and very resilient. So they flex according to the subject matter and according to the person with whom they're negotiating.
That's all very helpful. I'm thinking about the decoupling of the honesty and the openness,
Mm.
and thinking about how those are different things. And this idea of knowing the culture, both the macro culture and even the minor micro culture, and knowing how you have to approach the
Mm.
negotiation based on that. It goes back to that concept of planning
Oh, yes.
that you've talked quite a bit about here. Are we ready for the next slide?
I think so, yes.
Oh, this is where we talked about creativity. I've got a bigger I guess maybe I'll go back if you don't mind
Mhm.
to this slide here. And it's really about how do you go about disagreeing without being disagreeable, right? It seems like it's a very valuable skill. Um, and if you are in a situation where it's more of an aggressive type um, person that you're collaborating with,
Mhm.
how do you be aggressive without, I don't know, maybe overstepping the line and being rude? How do you manage that whole dynamic?
Yes, there's a great book out, again by the Harvard Law School program on negotiation called The Power of Nice.
Mm,
And I love that book because the essence of the book is you do not have to be aggressive to be an effective negotiator. To be an effective negotiator is like I'm goal oriented and I'm going to do everything I can to achieve that goal. And I also know that the research is clear that if my negotiating partner trusts me, if they like me, I'm going to be much more persuasive. So you think, how do I get a person to like me? How do I get a person to trust me? Well, one is listening and valuing them. There's a great research out of by Professor Roy Lewicki out of Ohio State University School of Business. And he, so beyond the characteristics, he goes the next step. And he says, what are the behaviors? What distinguishes between an effective persuader and kind of the average persuader? And for instance, one idea is looking for common ground. So if you're an effective persuader, you're always looking for common ground. Oh, we're both from Ohio. Oh, we both want this contract. Oh, we both agreed on these ground rules. Um, then another one, there's like 15 of them. Another one is focusing on the long term. So maybe you come in and you think it's like a one-term, 1-year contract, but you're thinking, because you've thought about this during planning, I'm going to go for a 3-year contract or a 5-year contract. Um, Use of irritators, that what they found out that skilled negotiators use irritators much, much less. And so some of the typical irritators would be, you should, you have,
mm,
just pointing is an irritator, let alone saying the you. And that's how you raise the ire of the person. But we, as effective negotiators, we know what those irritators are, like the yes, but, yes, I heard you, but. There's a lot of those. This leads me then to your question about being disagreeable. That behavior labeling. Behavior labeling is a great skill of an effective negotiator. So if you're already doing it, do it more. Behavior labeling is saying what you're going to do before you say it. So let me ask you a question. Let
Hmm.
me make 3 points.
Okay.
But the one area that I hear it so much, which is not good, let me disagree. Instead, what an effective negotiator does is that they listen to an option maybe that won't work. Instead of saying, I disagree, they value the option, they summarize the option, and then maybe a minute or two later, they come back and say, I have another idea. That way you don't even have to say, I disagree.
That so Larry, this really is an art and a science, right? And there's so many things that are wrapped up in this and what we've been talking about here. I know that we're getting close to listening to our audience, so I want to ask a question that I think that would be at the end, and that's the evaluation.
Mhm.
So after the negotiation concludes, what are the most critical factors to determine its success?
Yes, and I think that's kind of what I said before about, I'll say it again, because it's worth saying again, is that what you need to evaluate negotiation success, you need to review your goals. Did you meet your goals? Did the agreement meet the goals? If so, success. Then look at the goals of the other negotiating partners. Did they reach their goals? Did they walk away saying, this was a successful negotiation because all of the goals have either at least been achieved, if not surpassed? Because in my world here in Washington, D.C., where we have many, many attorneys, I wind up negotiating with the same people all the time. So I want, first of all, for them to see me as an effective negotiator, an honest, effective negotiator. Second of all, I want them to think, oh, I want to negotiate with Larry again because the last time we achieved all the goals. And so I think that's the way you evaluate negotiation success.
Okay, so this has been very, very helpful. I think that we probably have a lot of questions from the audience, so I want to make sure that we open that up here. Um, Before we move, do you want to just wrap up the conclusion and then we'll move to the audience, Larry, or are we ready to open it up?
I would say my conclusion is just what's on the slide, that we need to realize that negotiation is an art. It takes planning and diligence. It involves strategies, tactics, and skills that all can be learned if we're in the mood for learning. So a successful negotiation is the accomplishment of the goals of all the parties.
Okay, I think that's a great place to open it up. I'm going to stop the share here. So we'll just go to the folks in the audience. And you can open your cameras, open your mics, feel free to jump in, ask a question. You can also type your question into chat, and Henry will relay it to our speaker here. So what questions might our participants have today?
Well, I get started with the questions. For Larry, for Robert, as the world is constantly changing, how has negotiation tactics and strategies changed over the years, if it has changed?
It has changed dramatically. When I went to law school, well, first of all, we should start off by saying, in terms of legal cases, that 95% of all criminal cases are negotiated, are plea bargained, no matter what you see on TV. 98% of all civil cases are negotiated, no matter what you see on TV. When I went to law school at Capital University Law School, we had no negotiation courses. We had no mediation courses. We had no arbitration. We had no dispute resolution courses. The only glance we got at negotiation was in a trial advocacy course where a retired judge just gave a little glance at negotiation. He said, Larry, here's what you do. You invite them over to your office. You seat them behind a large desk
Mm.
and a soft cushion. You look down to them, and then you open the blinds and you blind them. And now you're ready for aggressive negotiation. Today in the law school, in Capital Law School where I teach, George Washington Law School where I teach, you could almost major in dispute resolution. We have negotiation, business negotiation, mediation, international arbitration, dispute resolution. So at least in the law schools and the business schools, things have changed dramatically.
Well, I love that image, Larry. It almost reminds me of I know we're towards the holidays, and I'm thinking about It's a Wonderful Life and that movie where George sits in Mr. Potter's chair, and you know. Okay, so we've got this idea where we need to be more successful negotiators as leaders. I have other questions too, but I want to make sure that we open it up to others before I ask another question. Who else may have a question for Larry here?
Well,
I have a, hey
Tim,
there.
please. Yes.
Yeah, so in this day and age of Zoom and Teams and everything else where you lose the human touch, I mean, I'm in-house now. When I was still in private practice, it was before COVID, we still would meet in person for mediations and negotiations and everything. And now trying to get people in the same room live is very, very difficult. How do you apply some of these techniques in the age of Zoom? Because I find it very difficult.
Well, it is challenging. And in fact, at my law school class, that the negotiations they do, that I make sure that they do one telephonically and at least one Zoom to give them the practice of real life negotiation. Because a lot of people have preferences. My preference actually is not face-to-face negotiation. My preference is either electronic or Zoom. At the same time, these list of behaviors that I had mentioned from Roy Lewicki, the OSU professor, they can easily be used per Zoom or electronic. Just a couple more. These are the character, because he was trying to figure out what are the actual communication behaviors that distinguish between an effective negotiator and an ineffective one. And all of these can be used electronically as well as Zoom, as well as face-to-face. So for example, one is argument dilution. So what a average negotiator will do is the average negotiator might say, I have 5 options. That's kind of too many. A skilled negotiator would say, I have 2 options. And that's called argument dilution. People can handle 2, just hard to handle 5. Asking questions. That a skilled negotiator asks questions twice as much as an average negotiator. And I know why. Because the average negotiator is busy talking, is busy yakking, whereas an effective negotiator is sitting back, asking questions, listening, summarizing. So when I go into a situation and someone says, oh, my grandparents founded this firm 56 years ago, and that is great. Keep talking. Talk as much as you want. I have all the time in the world. I will decide what is relevant and not relevant. So some of these skills like listening, summarizing, asking questions, you can easily use these in Zoom or electronic.
That's very helpful. Timothy, did you have a follow-up?
Well, yeah, I just curious. And is that the reason that you prefer online, not in person negotiations because of those 5 techniques, or what? Because I mean, from my experience, for example, a lot would get done sort of in the hallways or when you were waiting in a mediation and you were without the mediator and there might be another party there and you guys could kind of sit around and talk and learn about each other's families and all those sort of things to make it more human. There also was a time factor and an investment factor, I think, as well, because I mean, let's face it, on Zoom, you don't know if people are actively listening or if they're multitasking. And I'll admit I did look at a couple emails here while you were speaking. I apologize for that, but and trying to be honest and create some credibility there. So I'm just curious in terms of why you think that, particularly since I know that you went through face-to-face negotiations most of your career, I would
Oh,
imagine.
yeah, yes. Well, I feel very comfortable in my home environment, and the traveling is a big part of it, not having to go different places. Um, and it's interesting because my students at GW that I remember the dean the other day was saying, the students really hate this Zoom stuff. I had 3 students in my office the other day who complained about it. Well, I did not counter the dean by saying 3 students, and we have like 5,000 students here. But nevertheless, that what I found for the students is I teach on weekends, 2 weekends. So what they love the first weekend face to face, get to know each other and know who your partners are, et cetera, et cetera. And then a month elapses. The second weekend, they love Zoom because they can kind of stay home, be restful. And so they like that combination. And what I do in negotiation is that I try to discern what you like the most. So for Timothy, if you like the face-to-face, I'm going to do face-to-face. It doesn't care. I don't care what I like. I want to see what you like. So if Denise, if she likes electronic, we're going to do it that way. So I kind of, again, is putting yourself in their shoes, trying to get your fellow negotiator to at least like you, if not trust you. And next thing you know, they're going to listen to you more and you'll be more persuasive.
All right, thanks.
Other questions that we may have?
I have a question. How do you get your creativity back?
Hmm.
You lose that creativity in your negotiations. You're trying to come up with some solutions. How do you get the creativity back?
Well, it takes a lot of work, and you've got to think about it before. Because sometimes when people think about creativity, they think, "Oh, the idea that came to me when I was in the shower, or came to me," and so creativity can come in many ways. This is where planning is so important. So in planning, you have these issues. Okay, here's issue number one. I'm going to force myself to come up with 5 different options. It's going to be difficult, but I'm going to force myself. That's during planning. Then, when you're actually in the negotiation and you submit some of these options, it really does become contagious. And then next thing you know, the other person is submitting options. Every option that is mentioned in a negotiation with me is written on the board, so we don't lose it. And then sometimes someone will say, "Wait, what about half of that option and half of this option?" It takes a lot of work. And that's why I'm saying in terms of that example where there are the squares, dividing them into equal 4, that after those first 4, all the students are stumped. They have nowhere to go. And then suddenly someone begins to think, oh, wait, what about the circle? What about the squiggly line? Then the floodgate opens. So yeah, so it takes a lot of practice.
Larry, if someone wanted to, I always think of these lessons in leadership as a taste, right? We're getting a taste of this idea of negotiation. We're thinking about how it relates to leadership. We're developing some skills. What would you give us if we wanted to continue developing our negotiation skills and practicing? What are some resources that you would recommend that we look into to further develop these skills?
Well, I would look around at your nearby universities to see if they have negotiation courses, because that would be a good one. I've already mentioned that Capital University Law School not only has a negotiation course during the regular semester, but then I zero in specifically on business negotiation during the summer. Usually, the way my course is scheduled during the summer, it all takes place in 5 days. Um, I also have a dispute resolution blog that you might want to visit. I think I'm on my 200th entry for that blog, and you kind of skim through those about creativity. Um, another idea would be it'd be great to have another session like this, maybe specifically on persuasion and influence.
What's the name of your blog?
It's called Larry Ray Esquire So it's Larry Ray ESQ.
Mm-hmm.
And if you were to call up the slides again,
I will try.
you don't need to. But just look for Larry Ray ESQ, and it's a dispute resolution blog that covers. It's been going on for 3 years now, and it covers everything we've talked about right here.
So a course, a blog, is there a particular book or article that you'd recommend?
It's interesting you say that because the book that I use in my negotiation classes is by Roy Lewicki, Ohio State University. It's called The Essentials of Negotiation. And one of the law school deans came to me a couple years ago and say, "Why are you using a business negotiation textbook when this is a law school?" And my response is that this is an action-oriented course. So we're not really learning about the philosophy of negotiation. We're learning actually how to do it. I would like to have gone on to the dean and say, "You have just used one of those irritators that we teach not to use. That is starting a question with why."
This is very, very helpful. Are there any more questions from the audience that people might want to ask a final question or two in our couple minutes here with Larry? Seeing none, it is good to see all of you here today. Thank you so much. And Larry, thank you so much too. This has been a wonderful conversation. I've learned a lot in a short amount of time. So thank you so much. Henry, do you want to wrap it up for us here?
Yeah, again, thank you very much to Larry and Robert for this presentation. Outstanding. Thank you to the audience for being here today for the presentation. Definitely those who are interested in learning more about our graduate programs at the university and also looking at previous lesson leadership webinars, please visit our website to learn more about our programs. So again, thank you to everyone for being here, and I wish all of you a happy holiday season. Thank you for your time. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you also.
Thank you
Thank
all.
you. Larry, I think that went very well.
Oh, good, a success.
Did you feel good about it?
Yes, I thought I liked that kind of interplay of the questions, and so it was better than just a presentation.
Yeah,
It
I thought
made-
it worked well too. And we had a couple of our doctoral students online. It was great to see them and some other students. So thank you so much. We have just a little something we want to send you. Would you
Okay,
make sure that and we could just do it by email, but I want to make sure we've got the most current address for
okay.
you. So we'll reach out to you, but just a little thank you. But thank you so much.
Oh, absolutely. And it's funny that my interest in leadership does go back to Muskingum.
Yeah, I know we really do like having alumni because I think a lot of our alumni have had some of their first formative leadership experiences here, and it's great for our students to hear that.
And you think as a dorm director, a resident advisor, lots of negotiation.
Lots of negotiation. I have no doubt. I'll see you later. Happy holidays to you.
Holidays, bye.
Happy
Bye.
holidays. Bye.